Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting for October 11th, 2022. And the purpose of the special meeting is to take care of some work on the 2023 budget. So we'll have the special session, and then after that, we'll go into our customary work session, this being the second Tuesday of the month. So with that, if the city clerk would please call the roll.
Council members Judith Chandler, present. Julie Wolf,
Here.
Natalie Johnson, here. Nancy Fortune,
Present.
Michelle Weatherholt,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem John Shada, I understand will be calling in, but hasn't yet,
That's my understanding.
and Mayor John Graham.
Present.
Thank you.
And my understanding, just to elaborate a little bit, I think Mr. Shada is calling from a hospital in Denver. His mother's not had some medical issues, so he's up there. Okay, so business. The only item for the special session is presentation of the proposed 2023 fiscal year budget and the 5-year capital improvement plan. So we'll hear from Becca Davis, our finance director.
Good evening. Per state law, by October 15th, the budget officer must submit the proposed budget to the governing body, and then the governing body must publish notice of budget upon receiving the proposed budget. This presentation tonight is to satisfy that state law. On October 1st, City Council and staff had our annual budget retreat. And the fund balance for the general fund, the operating fund, was projected to be $6,689,712. Now that was for the recommended budget, where this is assuming if Colorado Springs approves retail marijuana in November, that there are no cuts and the Mobility and Parking Enterprise Fund remains a separate fund. Since the presentation, the summary of the general fund, which is included in your packet, has been updated to reflect changes that are not in this budget, but will be included at first reading. These changes will reduce the ending fund balance by $212,000 to $6,477,712. The changes are listed in the memo. Now, before entertaining questions concerning the changes and or the budget, I just want to mention that I've calculated the COG payment for 2023, and the estimate for that will be approximately $600,000. Now, are there any questions? Yes, Julie?
Where's the 600,000 in, is that in the revised budget that's in our packet?
No, the way this is referenced is through the, per our city attorney, we've included notes to the revenue. And in the notes to the revenue, it references the amusement tax, also known as the excise tax. And since this is a refund of that, we just budget for what we believe we're going to be able to keep. So it's not actually in there. It's really by omission. But I have included the contract with those notes. And while they're currently not in this budget, because since it's such a new thing, I forgot to tell Alex to include it. It will be included in the, by the first reading. And I plan to have that contract in here and forever if need be.
Yeah, I don't care about the contract. I'm more interested in, so does the proposed budget indicate then that city council has appropriated the full amount that we're allowed to appropriate under that contract? Is that what you did?
Right. That's exactly it, that
I see.
yes.
I believe that council is required to vote and make a decision under the contract and pursuant to the lawsuit, the court order that was entered on the lawsuit regarding the contract. I believe that we need to have a vote and we need to decide if we're appropriating all of that money back to the COG or some of it or what percent or whatever. I believe that's our obligation statutorily as well as that's what the judge ruled. So I would like to see some discussion about that certainly before the second reading of the budget so that we can have an opportunity to discuss the pros and cons and perhaps talk about other possible things we might want to use that money for. I know that's not a question, but I just had to say that. Thank you.
Ken, I was just going to check here real quickly to see when we have those readings scheduled. The first reading of the budget is currently scheduled for November the 15th. Second reading on December the 6th. So that's just to give you an idea of timelines.
So Mayor, does that give us time then before December 6th to have this discussion and this vote?
I would think so. I mean, that's based close to 2 months. We should, if there's interest from council, I think we could put that on the agenda and entertain that.
So just to
think we have to.
clarify, you don't mean today we have to approve the notice of budget, but we don't have to approve the budget.
No, we don't have to approve
So
the
that's
budget.
just, I'm just
No.
clarifying
We
that.
just notice of the
Yeah.
budget. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Becca, but this
Right.
just,
No, this is
It's just
not approving the budget. This is just approving putting the notice of budget into the local paper.
Yeah, this is just, you're meeting your requirement to notify everybody of your suggestions. Yeah, I get that. I just wanted to make sure it's on the budget, on the agenda sometime before December 6th, because I think we're legally required to make that determination.
I've read that contract. That wouldn't be my understanding, Julie, but since Jeff Parker isn't here, I guess we could ask him for his
Yeah, and
take on that.
I'd also respectfully suggest that you read the court order that was entered as a result of the lawsuit, because it explains that the reason this was all legal and it's not a violation of Tabor, and we weren't required to get voter permission for this tax agreement is because we are legally required as council to appropriate it every year. So it's just a 1-year commitment, year to year to year. So we need to appropriate it, even if we appropriate the 100%. In my opinion, and sure, we can ask Jeff. He already, well, yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Council, any additional questions for Becca, Michelle?
This is not for Becca, but as far as discussing this, is it possible to discuss this before first reading on November 15th? Or
Yeah,
wait?
yes. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional comments or questions? Okay, well, the recommended action is to move to accept submittal of the proposed budget. So I would entertain a motion if there's no further questions.
I move to accept the submittal of the 2023 proposed budget and direct staff to publish notice of budget.
Second.
Okay, we have motion a second. Any further discussion? If not, we'll vote. And
Yes.
Yes, I vote to approve if this is just the presentation of it.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a 7-0 vote in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Becca. Okay, that was the only piece of business we had for the special meeting. So I would call for adjournment. We can go into work session.
I move to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Or we can vote. Aye. Okay. Wait, I guess, okay. All right, so now we go into the work session. I'll call the work session to order. It's now 6:10 PM, October 11th, 2022. Mr. Shada is present telephonically. We did a roll call previously. There's no objection. We'll just move on.
Mayor, just so you know, I'm going to go ahead and turn this microphone on for Council Mayor Pro Tem Shada. And then I'm going to step out of the meeting since it's no longer a special meeting.
Okay, thank you. Before you step out, Judy, let's just make sure John can hear us.
With the hearing everyone. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, I can hear everybody fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Judy. Okay, so our first work session item, G1, legislative update by Representative Mark Snyder, House District 18. Mr. Snyder, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Graham and council, and I apologize for the door knocking attire, but I came straight from out meeting new constituents and doing some fundraising before that. So I really appreciate y'all giving me some time, and I'm excited to give you all a legislative update. You know, it's a little hard pre-election because I have no guarantee that I will be reelected and be back at the Capitol, but still planning in that vein anyway. So I didn't know what format, Mayor, you wanted to use here. Just allow me to a few minutes. I could go on for a couple hours if you would like, but I thought a couple of minutes would probably be better.
I think a couple minutes would be a good start. And then if we have questions, it could go on for a couple hours.
Yes.
So, other
Well,
than that, feel comfortable.
how quickly you got that presentation of the budget was a very encouraging sign. So, so I think you all know, I cut my teeth, so to speak, down here in our wonderful burg of the home rule city of Manitou Springs, and got elected in 2018 and have served two-year terms with redistricting last year. Now I House District 18, and we fought hard to make sure Manitou Springs stayed in House District 18. You know, this would be my third time going through the census as a resident of Manitou Springs, and they always are trying to put us in Fremont County or out with Teller County and what have you. So I'm glad to say that Manitou stays in House District 18, albeit a much differently configured House District 18. It's now a north-south district, whereas before it used to be an east-west, with Manitou being the west terminus and then out to Citadel Mall and Fillmore down to Cheyenne Mountain Road, Cheyenne Mountain Boulevard. And now it goes from Garden of the Gods, the entire western part of El Paso County, west of Interstate I-25, all the way down to Broadmoor Bluffs and South Academy, but really it goes all the way down 115, almost to the Fremont County line, and then all the way west to the Teller County line. So just a little background on where we are. So it's been my pleasure and serving in the House of Representatives to sit on the Business Affairs and Labor Committee, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee in the House, and also on the Legal Services Committee. It has been a tumultuous time for all of us the last 4 years. I guess 2019 was a pretty normal year, but it has been anything but normal. As you know, we, much like you did, we had to make radical changes to the way we did business, added a remote component. We took about a 10-week break in 2020 and about a 7-week break in 2021. This last session in 2022 began and ended on time. So that was a great sign. So I think we're back more, but there have been a lot of systemic changes in all aspects of most of our lives. Obviously, the middle 2 years, 2020 and 21, we were dominated by bills to, address some of the negative consequences of the COVID virus. Not just from a health perspective, but from a business perspective. I think we all remember when our favorite restaurants had limited hours, no indoor seating, and we tried all the street openings and allowing them to serve outdoors. And I'm really glad that we're through most of the worst of that. Although I think it'd be remiss if we didn't remember that we still have people contracting COVID. We still have people dying from COVID, but I think we've all become a little bit anesthetized to that. And we've gotten on and learned how to get through it with our lives. But I think it would be wrong to not remember that there's still it's still a risk out there and it's still causing harm and people to die. Having said that, in my time in the legislature, I feel really fortunate having been on the council and the mayor in Manitou Springs. The budget principles that apply in Manitou Springs are the exact same ones that apply at the state level in Colorado, just with a lot more zeros at the end of the numbers. And yet the principles are all still the same. And I know the same issues you guys are dealing with now are very similar to what we're dealing with in the state of Colorado. So I know the ballot measure in Colorado Springs will have a big impact on how you move forward. For the state of Colorado, all the federal stimulus funds and all the other monies, the billions of dollars that flowed through, those have pretty much been accounted for, expended, put into a line item, what have you. So in a very real sense, we're looking at a similar situation to what you may be facing here less than a month from now. And we're still laboring under Tabor at the state of Colorado. So all of the restrictions of the taxpayer Bill of Rights still apply. So despite our weathering through the the COVID time and everything else, we're looking at a very tight budget for the state of Colorado next year because of the Tabor cap and any surpluses having to be returned in one form or another to the taxpayers. We have very little discretionary spending already. The forecast is that, we're going to even have about half of what we had last year. But nevertheless, we have a new slate of folks, mainly from the Denver metro area, who are running in very heavily Democratic districts. So their real problem was getting through the primary. And now that that's over, I think we can safely say we're going to have several new members in the House of Representatives. And by and large, they are considered a more progressive, more, I don't want to use a socialist word, but more leanings towards that way. I am personally, I've always been what I consider a fiscal conservative, but I'm much more progressive, for lack of a better term, on social issues. And I think we've seen a reflection of that mostly this last session, the 2022 session, where we, first couple of years, certainly 2019, we passed a lot of very progressive bills that had been tied up in a divided legislature. So they didn't see the light of day in the Senate because that was controlled by the other party. And so we saw that kind of some bills that had been waiting years get heard, get done, go through. But last year I saw a big change with redistricting. A lot of people like myself found themselves in a much more competitive district. And I am a part of for lack of a better term, we call ourselves the Problem Solvers Caucus amongst the Democratic caucus of the House. And we are definitely more moderate, more business oriented, more trying to recognize that the lifeblood of a successful Colorado is a successful economy. And I'd like to say that it is not incompatible for you to have progressive values and want to create more equity in our society, in our economy, more justice in our criminal justice system, even with energy and environmental issues. There's a thing we call environmental justice, realizing that many of our disproportionately impacted communities are also disproportionately impacted by the locations of Suncor, refinery, a lot of the other industrial things. So to me, I think we can continue to advance our agenda, which is to create a more equitable and evenly distributed economic opportunity. And also at the same time, continue to grow our economy, to continue to attract new business from out of state. Colorado is still on the top of many lists for companies to relocate to. But what we've seen, and I think the pandemic and now this inflationary period has just exacerbated it. But Colorado is becoming an increasingly unaffordable place for many people to live. And so we have tried to address that with a raft of different types of bills. There's at least 15 directed solely to small businesses, so allowing restaurants to keep their sales tax for an additional 18 months, reducing business filing fees to $1. My bill last year increased the vendor fee, which is the amount businesses are we pay them to collect state sales tax. And so that was historically at 3%. We raised it to 4%. My bill takes it up to 5.8%, again, for a 2-year period. So we've done a lot of things we can, including the Colorado tax refund checks, which I know get a little politicized. But you may recall, I mean, I've been 30 years in Colorado. I've never gotten a check back for my Tabor refund. None of us have. What we do is we have 6 categories of taxes, several subcategories of each. And these smart people up at the Capitol figure out how we can lower each of those at a small amount so it will equal the amount of the Tabor surplus. So this year, instead of going through that normal process, which would have meant in 2023, we would have realized $5 here, $2 there. Instead, we brought all that money forward. I think it's about $3.1 billion, and sent checks out to every taxpayer in Colorado. And we did that, I think, one was to get the money into people's hands when they're really experiencing higher gas prices, higher grocery prices, other inflationary aspects. And I just think it's better to let people have the money and they can decide how best they can use that to address the challenges that we're facing now in the current economy. And it also had a more equitable component to it, because generally, when we do it the old system with a little bit of tax back to everybody, you know, people that pay more taxes will probably consume more products, spend more money. And so in the end, there would be a little bit more of a reflection of how much people pay taxes. Of course, we do not have a progressive tax system in the state of Colorado. It's a regressive system. It's one size fits all. And, you know, if you're making $300,000 a year, you know, 4.6% roughly of income tax, it's a decent amount of money, but it's not a game changer for you. But for people at the lower incomes, that makes a bigger difference for them. So we gave the tax checks out equally to everybody, I think partially with an intent to create a little more equity in our economy amongst people. So with the upcoming session, I would expect there's going to be some very challenging bills. I know already that there's a group talking about, they're calling it rent stabilization, but it's been known for many decades as rent control. And there's also talk of banning evictions, which we did during the pandemic, and that was a lifeline to many people. But those are issues where I struggle with, to be honest with you. You know, if you put an eviction moratorium or an absolute ban in place, you know, the idea is to keep people from being evicted from their living situation, generally an apartment, but it could be a house. But what we saw happen during the pandemic is landlords are much more discerning and much more cautious about who they rent to. So if you take away a tool like eviction for a landlord as a final last resort to, you know, get the property back to a condition where they're earning income on that, I think in the end, that would be more challenging for lower income people who a landlord might take a chance on now because they do have those protections. But if those are removed, I think a lot of landlords will just be, you know, will set that bar very high, and that will exclude a lot of people from having that. So I think I'm expecting that we will have a renewed effort to pass more progressive minded legislation. And I think that covers all areas, everything from energy production. Colorado is still the 5th largest producer of oil and gas of states in the country. And I'm very proud to say that I can say with full confidence that Colorado has the cleanest extractive industries, not only in the country, but perhaps the world. So some of the work we've done, I think, has really bolstered that and made it better. That we're not adding to global warming, we're not adding to more carbon into the atmosphere. And yet we see Denver's has been in non-attainment for several years now. And the question is, are they going to get a waiver again or not? If they don't get the waiver, they're going to have significantly higher gas prices. They'll have to put additives into their fuel. And I think so goes Denver, so goes the Pikes Peak region, just a couple of years behind them. So as you all may know, we have a air quality station right over by I think it's the middle school. And and we're always just below that non-attainment. So I believe it's still 75 parts per billion. And we're always in around the 73, 74 range. And with the growth that's going on in this region and all the new construction, the new homes that are being built really everywhere, as I can tell you, I've been out walking neighborhoods and there's a lot of new apartment buildings going up on Centennial. The Banning Lewis Ranch is 33,000 acres of developable property out there. I just read today, they're looking at another 1,100 acres south and they're annexing that into the city. Unfortunately, our neighbors to the east have always been very dependent on a growth model to keep their budget sustained. They're one of the few cities in the state of Colorado that have not debruced. And so they still labor under some of the most draconian parts of Tabor. And the only real way they see out of it is to keep growing. But, for Manitou Springs, as Colorado Springs goes, so do we in many ways. And so if we find ourselves in non-attainment or, water is a perpetual issue, I'm sure as you all very well know, Colorado Springs gets 70% of their water from the Colorado River Basin. It comes through those Trans Mountain pipelines. And we've already seen Arizona and Nevada have to take reduction in their allotments. I think unless there's a radical change in weather, it's coming for us also. And I know we get our water from our little reservoir here on the north slope, but we are kind of tied at the hip with Colorado Springs. So I think this session is, if it was up to me, and to some degree it is, I guess, but I would like us to look at some of the bills we've passed over the last few sessions. No bill I've seen yet anywhere, frankly, is ever perfect. There's often unintended consequences. So I think we'd be better served by just bolstering up a lot of the really transformative things we've done, figuring out where the unintended negative consequences are, what's worked, what hasn't, and really focusing on that. But I've noticed one thing in my time in the legislature, that is not a very exciting proposition for a lot of my colleagues. So I do think there's going to be a new raft of more progressive minded legislation. And like I said, I do not find that to be mutually exclusive with good, sound business and budgetary principles. I think both can be accomplished, but you need to roll up your sleeves and do the stakeholding with all the various groups and find out, a way forward that I think sometimes the best bills are ones that nobody loves, but everybody can live with. So, I think that's where I'll be focusing my energy should I be fortunate enough to get reelected. And I'm happy to talk about some specific legislation I'm already looking at or answer any questions. I don't know if I've been informative or not, but I'm happy to give you more detail.
Okay, why don't we see if council has questions or comments? Nancy?
Yeah, thanks for coming, Mark. You are in a very unique position, living here and having been on council and mayor, as well as working in the legislature to know the impacts on Manitou. And you've addressed a couple of those now. And you've also been helpful, I know, to some of us over the past couple of years to just feed us some very factual, useful information as we've had to make some very difficult decisions. So I just wanted to hear from you if there's anything that we should, in your opinion, if we should be doing, because we don't typically look at the state, you know, what's going on in the state. I mean, John gets some exposure to that at PPACG, but the rest of us really don't much engage, you know, we're looking internally. So do you have any advice for us or recommendations for us on things that we should be paying attention to or that we could be doing for our city, take things that we might take advantage of or warnings that we shouldn't be doing here in Manitou? Thanks.
Well, thank you for the question, Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, you're not Mayor Pro Tem anymore. Oh, that's right. That's Councilman Shada, right? Yeah, that's a great question. I've conversely, like I said, I've used my experience in Manitou as a lens to look at just about all the legislation that comes up there to see how it's going to really affect the people that are expected to implement it and to adhere to it and see if it really works for the boots on the ground, so to speak. You know, as a home rule city, which is a pretty unique model we have here in Colorado, you have a great authority to go, and we do some things that are preempted by state law, but many times what we'll do, we'll pass a law, and this includes even the paid family leave, which was on the ballot a few years ago. Aurora and Denver have already opted out of the state paid family leave program. So I think that's a particular issue that it would be good to keep on the forefront of the minds of a local official as a home rule city, is that many of the things that are mandated or passed up in Denver, you can opt out of. Not all of them, of course. And
We did in fact opt out of that, by the way.
but you did, okay. I had kept up with that. So, and I think that that'll be the standard course of things. And I think that is one that allows you to really make a determination. Is this something good for our residents, good for our taxpayers, good for our city or community? Or is it something that would be burdensome and costly and not go well with folks? So, you know, we talk about, but some things are pretty universal to us, regardless of our status as a home rule city. So when I talk about water, that is one. I know we have our own water system, and yet we're laboring under the same changes in the environment, the warming of the climate, the weather patterns changing. You know, I know in Manitou, we're never more than 6 weeks out of being in restrictions, even in a wet year like this, you know. And Manitou, of course, has always been a leader in the Pikes Peak region. So whether it was going to 100% renewables for the city's energy needs, which Manitou was the first city in Colorado to do so, or putting in micro hydro into our water lines from our reservoir to our treatment plant in order to power the treatment plant, which, if memory serves, is still the highest energy use function we have. You know, I think a lot of those things you'll continue to be able to do. I do worry, though, that if some of these really, if I lack the term for it, so I'll use progressive things, you know, I think will have potential negative impacts. So if they were to pass a statewide ban on evictions, I keep using that as an example, that would have consequences for here down in Manitou Springs. We have a large rental segment. We have quite a few landlords who own several properties, you know, and that would change, I think, the way that's going. One thing we've done is created an awful lot of money using a lot of stimulus money and federal money. But we put approximately $450 million into affordable housing initiatives. We put $600 million into behavioral health initiatives. And a lot of these are still just getting rolled out because the state's fiscal year starts July 1. So, you know, give the agencies 3 months to get ramped up, and those should be coming out soon. I think a lot of the dynamic up there has really changed from more specific bills with a fiscal impact attached to them to much more funding areas that we really want, that we know we have desperate need, and behavioral health is a perfect example of that. But there's so many different opportunities and options. And so we're kind of doing a little bit of throwing it all against the wall and seeing what sticks, which is not always the best way to govern, but it is a way to get that money out there faster and see what's happening. Same thing with affordable housing. So I ran a bill called the Middle Income Access Program, working through the existing state CHAFA housing division. There's only $25 million that goes into a certain program, but this program has proved very successful. So that $25 million investment from the government could turn into $250 million, $275 million construction of affordable housing. So I think what I'm seeing with the state government anyways, we realize we do not have anywhere close to the resources to address issues like homelessness and lack of affordable housing, but we can make strategic investments that allows for that to happen. So one thing I've always regretted, well, somewhat regretted, is I know about these things up at the Capitol, but I don't know who to speak to down here to tell you, hey, there's a program rolling out in the next couple of weeks that's going to have a large number of dollars available for behavioral health. And I wish there was somebody, there was like one point of contact. So I've talked to the Chamber of Commerce, I've talked to Colorado Springs Chamber, worked with them all through the pandemic on all the different things that were happening. But now we're entering a new phase where we're going to be addressing some of the real seminal issues of our day. And I just want Manitou to be fully aware of all that, and would love for you guys to be at the front of the line when it comes time to put in grant applications and however you all would see best to use that money. But there's real historic opportunities, I think, this year and next year with all the money that we've outlaid. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
yes, thank you. And I'm sure that we would have a point of contact that, any of us would be interested in. Housing Advisory Board. I mean, both of those issues that, or the planning is our point of contact for the Housing Advisory Board. But both of those issues, you saw me taking notes, mental health and affordable housing are two very high priorities for many of us. So we'll be in touch. But I do again want to thank you, because a couple instances specifically, for instance, the Citizens Initiative on marijuana last year, some of the facts that you provided to us were very helpful in that. And also, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but some of the information you brought to us about the redistricting, many on this council actually went and participated in that process. So, it is a partnership that you can take advantage of as much as we can take advantage of. So don't, let's remember, all of us remember that.
I've always felt we work better as a team and we get a lot more accomplished when we're all pulling in the same direction. So that's great to hear.
Good points. Julie.
I just wanted to suggest, with respect to your last comment on when you find out about new grant opportunities and so forth, if you could email all of council and the city administrator, and I'm sure the administrator will make sure that the correct departments are notified, but that way we get to see too what's going on. I'd really appreciate that. We may not necessarily have the staff to go ahead and draft, especially with deadlines, the RFP, the application for that money, but at least to be notified as early on as possible what's available so that we can decide what we might be able to apply for. That would be great.
That's an excellent idea, and I will definitely do that, keep you all better informed. It's one thing, the Capitol can be a very insular world up there under the Gold Dome. And it really helps to have people like yourselves that are, experiencing what's going on to give me a little more reality check up there. Because one area I've been passionate about really for the last 10 years is wildfires. Starting with the Waldo Fire, which, as we all know, we were very lucky, nothing burned in Manitou, but our problems began when the fire went out. We had 2 years of tough really at times devastating mud flows, debris flows, and flooding, we were able to build the channel up in Williams Canyon. I think that has given the community a little more confidence. But as far as wildfires, I've carried wildfire bills all 4 years that I've been up there. And, we put a historic amounts of money into programs like firmware and others that a bill last year incentivizes local governments. If they have a dedicated source of revenue for wildfire, then they can get 50% matching grant fund from the state. But what I've really come to find out over this summer is that local governments don't have the capacity. They don't have the personnel, the expertise, the grant writers, the grant administrators to pull down these funds and be able to, keep tabs on everything that you're going. So some of this money, unfortunately, is sitting still in the pots of money it was put in 2 years ago. So I'm still learning on the fly that it doesn't really help to provide the money if the jurisdiction doesn't have the capacity to accept it and to execute projects with that grant money. So I mentioned a few things. One of the bills I'm looking at is a revision to the senior homestead exemption, which we currently afford to disabled veterans. And now we just added last year Gold Star families, but that for seniors that have lived in their house for 10 years or more and reached the age of 65 can be a very meaningful deduction or non-assessed part of their property value. And especially for seniors that might be on a fixed income, like many are, they really count on that. What we're seeing, though, is it's become a disincentive for people to move to downsize. So you might be living in the family home, 4-bedroom home, 4,000 square feet or whatever. And, you get older and it's a lot to take care of. The kids are all gone and you would like to downsize, but you're on a fixed income. So if you were to move to a condo or some type of even assisted living, then you have to start that 10-year clock all again. And so you lose that exemption for 10 years. And that's a real disincentive for some people. So I am looking, it's one we've talked about the last couple of years. I think the secret will be to means test that, because there are people that qualify for the homestead exemption that are in a financial situation where they really don't even notice on their property tax bill that they're getting a first 200,000 is not assessed. So I think that's going to be the kind of trade-off that we're going to get in that area in order to help ease some of the housing difficulty shortages that we're facing now. We've got people living in much larger properties than they need to be or want to be. And I'm also looking at 2 wildfire bills, and I take a different approach. So the idea is to harden the building codes in the WUI, the Wild and Urban Interface. And some people prefer a top-down approach where the government mandates this is the new building codes. If you're going to build in a high-risk area for fires, you will adhere to these new, tougher, and frankly, costlier standards. My bill takes an opposite approach because I believe that the secret to getting something like that really adopted and embraced is creating the consumer demand and awareness. Because one thing I've learned over the years is whether you're selling homes or cars or widgets, you want to sell what people want to buy. So I'm looking at it more as an incentive program, an outreach and education program. So if you're looking to build that dream house that you and your spouse have saved up for 20 years, so you have the money to build that mountain dream home, for a small amount of money, average cost of about $3,000 to a new build, you can significantly harden your home and protect it in case of a wildfire. And these are practices we learned in the Waldo Canyon fire. Most of those homes, now granted, that was a unique dry thunderstorm with 70-mile-an-hour winds and it came racing down Queens Canyon. But after the fact, as we look at the 350 homes we lost, the vast majority of them were lost because embers got into the vents and the soffit vents of their homes. And once that happens, you're sunk. So for a small amount of money, you can change the way those vents are designed so that nothing can get in there. And then mitigation, which I know Manitou's been at the forefront of doing mitigation projects, but there's home mitigation. There's a Boulder partnership model that I'm very intrigued by, where the county of Boulder worked with their HOAs and special districts and metro districts and what have you. And they came up with a very vigorous checklist. And if your home can check all the boxes on that checklist, you get certified as having done that, and you get a 10% reduction in your homeowner's policy premium. So I think there's opportunities here. I'm working with property and casualty on the bill I was talking about before, which would, I think if the customers start to demand that, builders will build that. And you can imagine $3,000-4,000 amortized over a 30-year mortgage really is dollars a year, you know. I'm also looking at a evacuation modeling plan. That was a very contentious topic, I know, down in Colorado Springs, and many of our fire officials are not there yet as far as this evacuation modeling and evacuation times. But I can tell you, as I've been driving around Centennial and Broadmoor Bluffs and the Broadmoor itself, some of the new parts of House District 18, we have a looming disaster. God forbid if there were a dry season and a fire were to start coming down into Cheyenne Canyon, all those homes up there have some very limited ways to get in and out, ingress and egress, you know. And what we've learned from the Paradise Fire in California was that when you have that situation, I think 89 people perished in that fire, and all but 11 of them died in their vehicles trying to get out. And basically the cars, as the fire came upon them, their tires exploded, and then that car becomes a roadblock, you know. And I know that our fire department is doing a great job looking at the zone haven approach, which is a more specified approach. But I'm not convinced that reverse 911 is the answer for everything. We saw in the Paradise Fire, the first thing they lost was their cell tower communications, in which case reverse 911 is of no use to you. And even in the Marshall Fire in Boulder, there's a lot of people got calls to evacuate when they were not in harm's way. And there were people that were in the direct line of that fire that never got a call. So evacuation modeling, we would end up have a website established where you could enter in your own address and it will tell you what your evacuation times are, what your best routes are. Those of us who have been in the community for many years, we know the back roads and the secret ways to get in and out and around the busy summer traffic or whatever. But, you know, we have a lot of people that come here on vacation. They stay for 3 days, a week, a month, Airbnbs. We have new people moving in all the time. And I think, you know, that local knowledge is not shared by everybody. So I think if we had a standardized system that would allow for that, that modeling to occur and to publish those times on a website so people could access it for their house, could be great. But, you know, the most important thing is, of course, being aware, being prepared, knowing what you're doing. You know, if you see fire on the mountain, get out. Don't wait. Don't sit in your home and wait for somebody to call you and tell you it's time to leave. That's what we need to create, that kind of mindset and culture. So that's what I'm working on with that one also. Then I've got a couple of different other bills. One is actually has to do with cannabis. It's creating a more enforcement and more teeth for the MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, much like we do it with the LED, the Liquor Enforcement Division. We actually have sworn officers who are post-certified out in the field, checking to make sure that people are complying with the laws. And what we're seeing in the cannabis industry is that's not always happening. You have groups where their product gets moldy or somehow degraded and it doesn't pass an inspection test, and yet they sell that product anyway. So it's a gap in our system. So I want to give the MED the same ability that the LED has to go out on site, see something and actually shut down a business if they're not in compliance with the law.
Thank you, Mark. Other council people, questions, comments? I think it's been pretty thorough, Mark. Was very pleased to hear you talk about evacuation modeling. That's a huge concern. It's come up a number of times at PPACG and PPRTA meetings. It is acknowledged as a problem. There has been no solution yet. So anything you can do to be cognizant of that, again, it'll be a team approach.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, we'd be very interested in seeing some progress on fire mitigation, hazard reduction. I mean, you've been there, you've done that. I don't have to preach to the choir in evacuations. That would be really important, I think. A couple of things that are kind of on my list: traffic. Traffic it's a big problem. Growth is a big problem. So those factors, I'm sure you work that into your everyday policy stuff. But in my mind, those are things where Manitou, of all things, I mean, with the last census, we actually shrank a little bit in terms of population, but you come down, I mean, any weekend, even now in the wintertime, and it's elbow to elbow people, we're kind of coning on for Colorado Springs. So the growth in Colorado Springs is kind of changing, life here in Manitou, and it's putting stressors on us that that's from external forces that we can't necessarily address by ourselves. Traffic on Highway 24 is a big deal. So anyway, I'm sure you're aware of that. So we would ask you to keep rooting for the home team, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And transportation funding is a tough nut. We've had that ballot measures fail over the last 10 years or so. Finally, I thought we came up with a brilliant idea, which is the Bill 260, which charges a small fee on deliveries and Ubers and that kind of stuff. And bringing forward billions of dollars for transportation funding. And yet we're getting dinged by a lot of people. Oh, it's a tax disguised as a fee or, whatever. And, I thought it was really ingenious. But, how do we widen Highway 24? I mean, they extended the turn lane at 31st Street, much longer than it used to be. And it's already not keeping up with traffic patterns. I can tell you when I'm coming back on a Sunday, I'm already thinking, which back roads am I going to take? Because I'm not taking Highway 24, and a lot of people are figuring out Colorado Avenue as an alternative, and that's getting backed up. And with Old Colorado City looking at doing some traffic calming, much like we did, I think it's only going to continue. And if you look at the Waldo Canyon fire, we got all those people out of mountain shadows, really with seconds to spare. Well, the untold story is all those people had to go somewhere, all leaving at one time. And if you look at the aerial photos of Woodman and Academy, it was a parking lot stretching in for miles in all directions. It was complete standstill gridlock. And granted, that's over on the other side of the highway and out of the serious high risk fire danger. But I think that's just a perfect example that, there's always issues. So we could build a flyway on Highway 24 that goes over 31st Street. And so, keep that traffic moving. But then what happens down at 26th and 21st Street, Manitou Avenue, so these things are all have to be taken in conjunction. So I think one thing I'm committed to is looking at ways that we can make frankly, the developers pay their fair share, because oftentimes they build their homes and they take out surety bonds. And then when the times come to build a new police substation or an elementary school, those bonds are woefully insufficient for meeting those needs. And who picks it up? The taxpayers, So I think that we can do a better job of forecasting what the impacts are going to be of new development and making sure that the developers are accountable and have to take care of those things. And that includes evacuation lanes and things out of there. So I don't think it's unsolvable, but it's a very tough lobby, so to speak, especially in Colorado Springs. But I think there's some things that we can do to really facilitate a new way of thinking and smarter growth and smarter development.
Great, thank you. Anything else, council? I guess not. Well, Mark, thank you very much. This has been helpful. We maybe after the first of the year, we could revisit some of these topics.
I should be rested up by then. So
Okay,
that
okay.
should be fine. Mayor, if it's okay with you, I'd like to leave one of my state cards with each of the members. I'll leave them over here with the city administrator, maybe. That has my cell phone number and email address. So if anybody wants to reach out in particular, please don't hesitate to do so.
Okay.
Thank you all very
Great.
much.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mark. Catch you later. Okay, the next item, Colorado Springs Utilities wastewater rate presentation.
Mayor, may I go ahead and introduce them? Is that okay?
Oh, please do it.
Sure. Bill Bolsh is our account manager. And when they reached out to us talking about a rate case that they'll be presenting to their board in the near future, I asked if they would be willing to come here and just talk about it with our board. So they are here to discuss it. I do want to mention this doesn't mean that our residents get the same rate case. It's what we pay for to do our rates, right? And then we charge for it, we pay for them to manage our wastewater. So just want to share that, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to them. Bill, are you going to do the introductions or how do you want, are they going to introduce? Scott, are you going to introduce yourself? Okay, great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Graham and members of City Council. My name is Tristan Gerhardt. I'm the Chief Planning and Financial Officer with Colorado Springs Utilities, and I'm happy to be here today. And appreciate some time to be able to discuss our upcoming wastewater rate case that will be going before our City Council as of October 25th. Scott?
Yes, and my name is Scott Shirola. I'm Manager of Pricing and Rates for Colorado Springs Utilities, and thank you for having us here this evening to deliver this information.
So we have a short presentation we wanted to go through with the council and really wanted to start out with just some background information on the regional service, regional wastewater service in particular. So going back to 2017, as a part of our integrated water resource plan that was being done at Colorado Springs Utilities, our utility board asked our utilities staff to really look at proactively pursuing a regional water service tariff that is there for both the water service and wastewater. And as a result of that recommendation from the IWRP, we conducted a utilities policy advisory committee assignment in 2018, the result of which was some direction to move forward in 2019 and 2020 with some studies on what regional service would look like. Prior to this time, contracts did exist with others in and around the community of Colorado Springs, including Manitou, on a contract basis for some of our water and wastewater services. As a result of the work that was done in 2018 and 2019 through studies and workshops, we came before our city council in 2019 with a recommendation for a regional water and wastewater tariff that was added to our tariff of services. That went into effect as of January 1st, 2020, which really established the current tariff that Manitou participates under for wastewater service. Looking at that particular tariff and the impacts that it had at that time, and the way that it was calculated, really what we had was a average system cost of our wastewater service, excluding certain costs and adding a 10% administration fee as a multiplier that was there. That impact from that change to the regional service really began in January of 2020 and had three phase-in periods. We did not take the full amount of that in the initial portion, but as in three steps as of January 2020, January 2021, and January 2022. So that just this past January was the final step of the phase-in of moving to that regional water service. What we are now proposing as of 2023 is not any change in that regional water service, but just looking at the cost of all of our wastewater service and have a rate case that is proposed for all of our wastewater customers. Looking at that total wastewater cost of service and rate case that we're presenting, we project an overall 4% system increase in costs that are there that we are looking to seek through the revenue requirement that relates to about $2.8 million on our wastewater system. And looking at some of the drivers that are driving those costs that are different and the need for that rate case. A lot of this points back to some of the inflationary pressures that many are seeing around the state and nation, increased supply costs, increased labor costs, especially on some of our capital improvement projects that are going on, but also just our normal system maintenance that's occurring in our wastewater system. Looking at how that overall system 4% breaks down when we look at things from a by residential or by customer class breakout, what we see is the schedule that you can see there for residential, non-residential, our military contract service military, and our contract service regional customers. And again, as we look at what this means specifically for Manitou, the rate is going up 0.0024 cents per cubic foot, going from 3.12 cents to 3.36 as requested in this rate case that's going forward. When we look at that, if your usage stayed the same from 2021 to 2023, it would equate to about a $38,000 increase to the city of Manitou. With that,
Could I ask a question? Sorry. So
Yes.
we're under your regional customer?
yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
That's what we have for our presentation portion, but wanted to open for any questions that you have specific to what we're seeking with our city council.
Nancy?
So basically, this is information only. We have no I won't say no influence. We have no control over this, correct? It's the utility board, basically, your city council being also the utility board.
Right, so the city council of Colorado Springs will vote on this rate increase at the first public hearing portion of that is October 25th at our regular city council meeting.
Okay. And it occurred to me as I was reviewing this briefing that I was really rather ignorant of the various systems and who's responsible for what. So when we're talking about wastewater, it's the treatment, we're talking just for Manitou, only the treatment, not our infrastructure. And our sewage and our wastewater that we're currently paying for in Manitou, the infrastructure just goes to treatment in Colorado Springs, correct?
That's right. When we look at those regional service costs, the excluded portion of that, and Scott, please correct me if I'm wrong, but 100% of collection is excluded. 100% of customer costs that we have on Colorado Springs are excluded from that regional rate that's there.
Okay. So because I don't fully understand all of this and I realize that. So why is the regional increase so much more than the residential increase?
Yes, just as we go through our cost of service, and I may turn it over to Scott for some of the details and what we look at from those different buckets of costs. Basically, when we look at the overall revenue requirement, we came out with $2.8 million needed for all of those costs. And then we start breaking those down by cost of service type into the different categories of customers that we have. As you saw, there was our non-residential service that we had for our customers was going up by about 9%.
Right.
Close to 10%. Our military is also going up over 10%. Again, it's just some of the categories, and I believe Scott has some cost of service information he could share that may help you to understand how that $2.8 million breaks down amongst the different costs there.
Sure. And so we do perform a cost of service study, which is a fancy way of saying we look at the costs that we need to collect for our wastewater service, and we kind of chunk that into different parts of the wastewater system. And then we allocate that cost to the different rate classes as appropriate. For the contract service regional rate, we, as Tristan indicated, we use what we call the average system cost methodology. Sure. Is that better? Okay. So for the regional service, we use what we call an average system cost methodology, where we look at the cost to operate the entire wastewater system, excluding certain pieces, as Tristan mentioned. We don't include 50% of the collection system because we recognize that regional entities already have a collection system connected to each of the homes to get that wastewater to kind of a central point. So we credit that back, and then we don't include other parts of costs that aren't related to regional service. So we kind of do that cost of service for each of our types of services. And I think the previous speaker kind of hit on one main reason why the residential kind of rate increase is less than the other classes we're seeing with the growth that we're seeing in Colorado Springs, especially on the residential side. There's more residential sales to collect the cost over, whereas there isn't really sales growth on the commercial or the contract military or the regional side as much. So there's just not that sales growth to keep the relative rate increase down, which the residential class is benefiting from that.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure that makes as much sense as I would like it to, but I appreciate your explanation.
Judith?
Yeah, this was pretty over my head too. I'm looking at the estimated bill comparison in the packet. And I was really confused because it has in the center, it has the total current rate, the total proposed rate, the percentage or the monetary difference, and the percent difference of 7.7%. And then in the slides, it was broken down. Is that an average of those? I'm confused where this 7.7, what that means.
Right. So really what that breaks down to is we go through, and again, some of this goes back to this cost of service versus our total revenue requirement. If you think of the revenue requirement, that's what we require for our whole system based on all the different costs that we were seeing projected for 2023. So if you think of that as a whole pie, that whole pie was about $2.8 million that we needed to collect from our customers. That was in addition to what the current rates would produce. From there, we start breaking that down by each of the different each of the different classes, residential, contract service, all of those different pieces. And those are slices of the pie that we go through and say, each of these are responsible for a portion of that $2.8 million. What it ends up coming out based on that cost of service study that was conducted by Mr. Sherrill and our teams at the utilities was contract service required 7.7% of an increase over their current rates to contribute their portion that's needed to make up that $2.8 million. If you think of it overall from the utility standpoint, that $2.8 million, Manitou as one customer based on our projection of flat kind of usage there makes up about $30,000 of that $2.8 million that's needed to collect. Going back to kind of Scott's point there as well, one of the reasons residential is less, if you go back to the last time we did this cost of service study in 2020, we had many fewer residential customers that were connected to our system. When we bring in all of those customers that are paying rates in on the residential side, there's many more to split those costs that are allocated their slice of the pie. In this cost of service study, which is why they're a little bit below the 4% average growth that we're seeing in those other categories, because there has not been as much growth in the military, though the contract service, the customers stay relatively flat. So the same number of customers to split up additional costs that are there.
Thank you.
Julie?
Okay, I'm just going to take a stab at this. So is this correct that essentially your evaluator assessed that it will cost you 7.7% more money than in 2022 to take care of Manitou's wastewater? Is that right? Is that? a
Yes, that's right.
summary?
And it's really across that entire regional contract service tariff. It needs to go up by 7.7% for all of those customers, including Manitou, to be able to cover those portions of the costs that are going up that were allocated back. So that portion of the $2.8 million that was allocated back specifically to the contract service customers. I'm sorry, the regional customers.
Thank you. And I can't find the slide right now. Oh, it must have been in the other attachment. Where that came down to, was it like 38 grand or something?
Yes, let me get the exact number. I think I've been saying $30,000, but I have the exact number here.
Oh, I think it's the other attachment. Oh, yeah. 37.9, so 38,000, yeah. Is the increase, if I understand your chart correctly.
Yes, I believe that's the correct number. And again, that's assuming flat usage. So if usage remained the same, then with that increase of 7.7%, we would anticipate around that $39,000 increase in cost.
Thank you.
Other council questions? Well, I have a question. Could you give us an example of your other regional contract customers? Who besides Manitou is like us?
Yes, there's a couple, and the exact wastewater districts escape my mind, but there are, I believe, a couple other municipal type wastewater districts or municipalities that we treat their wastewater on a similar basis for.
Okay. Does Monument have their own wastewater treatment plant? Do you know, or?
Yeah, Monument is not currently one of the regional service customers.
Okay, thank you. This is it's going to be a little bit off the wall, but you may be familiar that Cimarron Hills Water District and Monument, they have a consortium of the water providers or would-be water providers in the northern part of the county. They've got a plan to recycle water. You're probably familiar with that. And I've heard that presentation, but as it fell outside of the Manitou watershed, it didn't get a whole lot of interest from me. But now as I think about it, so we give you our wastewater and then you treat it, and I guess you put water, you dump the clean water back into Fountain Creek. Under their plan, it would go basically down to the county line, going to Callahan Reservoir, I think that, or Callahan, and it would be pumped back up so that Monument would be able to use it. It seems to me like, in a sense, Manitou's also becoming a water provider to Monument. And it seems to me like we ought to get a little bit of credit for that. I mean, water someday, it'll be as expensive as bourbon.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. The infrastructure required to transport that water back to be able to get the reuse properties out of it. In that case, if you are able to store in another place and maybe exchange water rights, there's some potential applications there. But in many of these scenarios that we've heard about, it really is building a pipeline that has return flows from wastewater treatment plants, which is not a inexpensive endeavor. But as we see the shortage of water, the price of acre feet of water continuing to soar, you can see some of those applications are probably necessary for water and wastewater providers to get the maximum use they can out of that water supply.
I understand. I think what I said was a little bit far-fetched, but it was based on having heard a discussion that some people would also consider far-fetched. So, and I understand this is not a solution for tomorrow. And what we're looking at in the near term is what you're proposing tonight. But, When I heard that thing about, the recycling water, I thought, well, that makes sense. They're taking care of the environment. You're recycling the water, reusing it as much as possible. So I think it's a good idea. I think, maybe at some point Manitou would like to see if we get a little credit for that. So.
Yeah, and I'm not a water attorney, so I'll be a little out of my area here, but assuming that the water that you're using and putting into the wastewater system is kind of native Arkansas River water, there'd be an obligation to return those flows downstream. I'm guessing that the reuse water is probably trans-basin water. And so if an entity is going to actually use water kind of out of priority, they'd have to purchase those water rights to be able to use that. Some of those reuse systems are actually, you're able to use water from out of basin, such as from the Colorado basin. You're able to use those to extinction. And so that's where water can be reused without hurting downstream users that have a right to that return flow.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Council, anything else? Gentlemen, anything you want to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. It's always good to work with the city administrator and be able to discuss these items. If there are additional questions, we understand probably not the greatest news ever, but our goal is to make sure that we provide as much information as we can to our customers, of which Manitou is definitely one that we appreciate the opportunity to work with.
The only thing I did want to add, I don't know if you guys can speak at all about the federal government guidelines and what's being pushed on from a wastewater perspective. I do know many small towns are struggling right now due to their wastewater is not hitting the guidelines, and it's costing millions and millions of dollars to try to get their wastewater system up to par. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, of what you're required to do right now based on the federal guidelines.
Yeah, and I believe Scott maybe has a little bit of information there. Part of what we were really trying to do is we went through some of those studies in the 2018 and 2019 period of time, was look at some of the availability of Colorado Springs utilities as a entity that has a number of connections and has maybe more infrastructure that is in place, to be able to share it with others in the region, to be able to take advantage of some of those economies of scale related really to some of those water treatment regulations that have really been amped up in the last number of years here. Scott?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have any of those exact standards right off the top of my head, but I think Tristan hit the nail on the head there. Really, the whole goal of that regionalization study that utilities embarked on starting in 2018 was really to be able to provide support to other regional entities that where building new wastewater systems or expanding their wastewater systems to really meet those increasing regulatory standards would be very cost prohibitive. Kind of leverage utilities assets to be able to provide a solution that worked for those entities needing their wastewater treated, as well as the citizens of Colorado Springs, and provide a benefit to them as well. So that's a general answer to your question.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Well, council, that pretty much knocks off most of what we had on the agenda. So it's council correspondence time. Anybody got anything? Judith?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to huge shout out and kudos to you, Mayor, for the Indigenous Peoples Weekend. I thought it was phenomenal. The stuff that legends are made of. I felt that I was stirred emotionally And I just thought the community potluck was fantastic. Just another example of our community coming together. It's just wanted to thank you and the city for that. And the only other thing I have is the Colorado Municipal League is having their annual elected officials workshop. It's going to be Thursday, the 1st of December. It's all day. You can either go in person to the CML headquarters. It's $85, including lunch, or you can do a Zoom. It is an all-day workshop. The Zoom is $50. However, if 3 or more individuals from one municipality sign up, we get a $10 discount per individual. I am going to attend the Zoom, so just wanted to encourage if there's anybody else that wants to attend. The agenda is not out. However, I hear that it's a really good workshop. I don't know if you've attended it before, but I'm going to attend it. So anyway, just want to put that out there, the 1st of December. That's all I've got.
Great, thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, D2 construction has arrived on site at the Refund and they're starting deconstruction and mitigation. So that's good.
Okay, great. Michelle, did you anything down here? Julie?
I just have one thing. I got asked by a resident if the dumpsters on Ruxton are no longer a sidewalk, but I guess they're now on private property, but extremely visible from the street. And I was asked if the city decided to give them a waiver from having to comply with our laws that say the dumpsters should be not visible or should be in an enclosure. And I said, I don't know. So is that something? Is there something going on Ruxton where they don't have to comply or given more time to comply, or any update about that?
Julie, I don't have the exact deadline, the exact information, so let me look into it and I'll get back with you so I can have all the details.
And I'm sorry, I wasn't given an address, so I don't know exactly where
I
the
think I
person
know-
was complaining about.
Yeah, I think I know where it's at, and I think there's an issue that we're managing, but I just want the facts before I respond.
When you're managing it, can you elaborate on that for us? It's so vague.
Yeah, can I just get it? Because I think there's a fence issue and some other things, if it's the place that I think that they're talking about, that we're working on, but I will get that to you.
Thank you. That's
You
all I
bet.
have.
Okay. Natalie? You have anything? Okay. Well, I'd just like to add, Indigenous Peoples' Day was a team effort. It came together a lot better than I thought it would a couple of times. It was pretty, it seemed like off and on. But it went well. I saw a number of you there. Denise and her husband were serving food Sunday at the potluck and then cleaning up. So shout out to her. Really shout out to everybody. We acknowledged 6, I think, different tribes. So now we are, if you were wondering, we're officially at peace with 3 tribes of Utes: the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Shoshone, the Apache, and the Comanche. And last year we made peace with the Lakota. So things are looking up. It was a good time. And yeah, I think Manitou, it came together. I think we did something that was genuinely Manitou. It was a grassroots moment. And I think people felt they were sincere. They didn't have to wear COVID masks. I think it built community. So thanks to everybody who helped. Nancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to, folks who don't know, they've put the primer on the Hiawatha Gardens building and we'll start the mural soon. So it looks very different now.
Okay, City Administrator's report.
We'll be paving Cannon Avenue and striping next week, and also the turtles for the crosswalks will be done next week as well. So weather permitting. That's all I have. Thank you.
Denise?
Yeah, just a couple of quick updates regarding some of the presentations tonight. I wanted to let you know, we usually hear most of the grant applications and grant things that's coming down that's available through PPACG. they're really our contact and they're sending it out on a pretty regular basis. I think you also receive those updates as elected officials. And then the county sends us those updates on a regular basis, and so does CML. So we get probably most of those updates of what's available in grants. I also want to mention that we have taken advantage of many of them. You know, we have the behavioral health that, as Chief Otto had mentioned, that we have. We just need to find the practitioner that can come and help us with that. We have a very large fire mitigation grant that we're working on up by our reservoir that we started last year. That's part of our 3-year budget. So we've taken part of that. And then the CML, I want to mention that one of the things that they will be bringing at the June meeting is for fire mitigation for insurance is mainly underinsured. And that's been the biggest issue. And what does that look like? So they'll be bringing that to the June meeting for you, all of you, to vote on and decide how you want to proceed with that in legislation. So I want to mention that. And then under the HAB, as I've mentioned before, I've met with the Housing Authority, and the biggest thing for us for affordable housing is just where, right? Where can we put affordable housing? What does that look like? And how do we move forward with it? Because there is funding, but the question is, where is that available? Where do we have space to really do an affordable housing? So I wanted to mention that also. The other thing I wanted to mention regarding the wastewater, I think all of you who attended, or those that attended any workshops at the CML conference, you heard the small communities and the struggles. Many small communities have total bans on any tap fees or any taps due to the wastewater and the limitations. So that is a very highly regulatory item right now that many small communities cannot afford because the federal funding is not out there to help with those. So I wanted to mention that as we move forward with those things. I believe that's all I have, unless if you have questions for me. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is we don't pay any tap fees to Carlisle Springs. So some of their wastewater, their tap fees that the residents pay, that helps with the funding with their operations, and we don't do any of those tap fees.
Good. Well, this being a work session, we can go ahead, and if there's no objection, adjourn. No objection, we're adjourned. Okay.